There are some moments in life you wish you could erase. Not because they were loud, or violent, or even scandalous, but because they were quiet. Too quiet. And in that silence, something irreversible happened. It wasn't planned. There wasn't a setup. No seduction. No pretense. Just a moment, raw, unfiltered, and I thought I was alone. It was late. The kind of late where the house hums with silence, where the world is asleep, and even your own thoughts whisper so they don't wake the ghosts. I'd had a long day. One of those days where you go through the motions, smile when expected, nod when spoken to, cook, clean, answer politely. But inside, you're hollow. Running on memory. On duty. My husband was away. Again. Work trip. Or maybe just an escape from the marriage neither of us wanted to admit had grown cold. And Liam, my stepson, he was supposed to be asleep. I'd said goodnight to him hours ago. Lights out. Door shut. So I did something I hadn't done in, God, I don't know how long. I took off the mask. I lit candles. Not for anyone else. Just for me. Soft music. Just low enough to remind me I was still alive. I ran a bath. The water warm. The air sweet with lavender. And for the first time in months, I let myself feel feminine. Not just a wife. Not just a stepmother. Not just someone filling a role in a house too big and too empty. I wasn't thinking about anything or anyone. I was just being, breathing, and then a sound. Soft, but wrong. I turned my head, and there he was. Liam. He wasn't supposed to be there. He wasn't supposed to see. But he did, and he didn't look away. He just stood there, still, silent. Watching, not with lust, not with shame, with something else. Something that made the air between us thicken. Something that made my skin burn not from exposure, but from being seen. And in that one quiet second, everything changed. I wrapped myself. I closed the door. But it was too late. The damage was already done. And now? Now I can't stop asking myself, what did he see? And why did a part of me, a small, aching part, feel relieved that someone finally did? So let me ask you something. What would you do if someone saw you at your most vulnerable and didn't look away? Would you run? Would you hide? Or would you feel alive? Tell me in the comments, have you ever been caught in a moment you weren't ready to share? And if this kind of story pulls at your soul, subscribe to Shocking Infidelity Saga right now. Because here, we don't just tell stories. We unravel the human heart. I'm 42. Been married for 8 years. To a man who, on paper, checks all the boxes. Stable job. No scandal. Pays the bills. Doesn't raise his voice. A good man, as everyone says. But good doesn't always mean present. Or loving. Or warm. Especially not after the miscarriage. 3 years ago. I still remember the sterile lights, the cold doctor's voice, and the way he held my hand, like it was part of a job description. Something broke that day. Not just inside me, but between us. He never spoke about it again. Just buried himself in his work. Long hours. Silent dinners. The kind of silence that builds a wall, not out of bricks, but out of absence. And then there's Liam. He came into my life when he was 11. Quiet. Polite. The kind of kid who watches more than he speaks. He's 19 now. Still quiet. Still watchful. He's never called me mom, I never expected him to, but over the years, we found a rhythm. Not quite family. Not quite strangers. Something in between. He's got his father's eyes, but not his father's coldness. There's something softer there. Something curious. The house we live in is beautiful, white walls, big windows, clean lines. A designer's dream. But it's cold. Like a showroom. And I became part of the decor. Neat. Polished. Silent. I wake up. Cook breakfast. He takes his coffee to go. Liam eats at the counter, headphones in. I clean, answer emails I don't care about, fold clothes that aren't mine. Then I scroll through pictures of strangers pretending their lives are perfect. And every now and then, Liam would walk by, not say a word, but his eyes would linger. Just for a second. Not long enough to be noticed, but just long enough to feel it. And what scared me most was that I noticed it back. Not in a lustful way. Not in a way I wanted. But in a way that reminded me I was still there. Still seen. I tried to shake it off. Told myself I was imagining it. That I was just lonely. That I was projecting. But deep down I knew. It wasn't the look. It was the fact that, for once, someone looked at me at all. I would catch myself watching him walk away. Wondering what he was thinking. Feeling guilty. Feeling empty. Feeling like I was losing pieces of myself, one glance at a time. I'd scrub the kitchen twice. Fold the towels again. Try to pray. Try to breathe. Try to forget. But the truth is, I was unraveling. And nobody seemed to notice. Nobody, except Liam. He saw me. And part of me hated how much I needed that. It had been one of those days. The kind that feels heavy before it even begins. Gray sky, cold coffee, an unanswered message from my husband, who was, again, too busy to say good morning. The silence in the house echoed louder than any noise could. And by the time the sun dipped below the horizon, I felt like I had spent the entire day holding my breath. I needed a release. Not drama, not comfort, just space. A pause from the pretending. So I ran a bath. Not out of luxury, but necessity. The kind of bath where the warmth feels like something's holding you for once. I lit candles. Vanilla. Jasmine. Not for romance, but for remembrance. To remember what it felt like to care for myself. To smell softness. To see a flicker of light in a world that had gone dull. I turned on music. Low. Mellow. Something soulful. The kind of song that moves through your bones before you realize you're swaying with it. I closed the bathroom door, but not all the way. Habit, maybe? Or maybe part of me didn't want to shut the world out completely. I assumed everyone was asleep. Liam had been in his room since dinner. No footsteps. No sounds. Just stillness upstairs. And my husband was miles away, buried in spreadsheets or a hotel room bed that wasn't mine. I undressed slowly. Not to be sexy, but to be real. To let the skin beneath my skin breathe again. To let the woman beneath the title of wife, stepmother, homemaker, exist. I stepped into the tub and let the water hold me. It was warm. Not too hot. Just enough to melt the day off my shoulders. And, for the first time in months, I let go. My arms moved through the water. My fingers traced the edge of the tub. And then, without thinking, I rose to my feet, still wet, still bare, and let the music guide me. Not dancing for anyone. Not trying to be anything. I wasn't trying to impress, or seduce, or perform. I was just feeling, moving for the sake of moving. Freeing myself from the weight of roles I didn't ask for. I spun slowly. Eyes closed. The candlelight flickering across the walls. For a moment, I forgot I wasn't alone in the world. I forgot I was supposed to be careful. And then a sound. So soft, it barely existed. But I heard it. A subtle shift in the air. A floorboard whispering under pressure. I turned. And there he was. Liam. Standing in the hallway. Framed in the cracked open door. Still. Wide-eyed. Not shocked. Not aroused. Just transfixed. He didn't run. He didn't look away. And I didn't scream. Didn't cover myself in a panic. Didn't shout. I froze. For a full second, neither of us moved. And in that second, 1,000 things passed between us that words would never be able to explain. My chest rose and fell with shallow breaths. The air in the room shifted, thickening with something unnamed. Not lust. Not guilt. Something in between. I finally reached for the towel, slow and deliberate. Not rushed. Just enough to cover what was already exposed. He still didn't move, just watched. Quiet. Still. And then, he stepped back, one foot behind the other, disappearing from the doorway. No apology. No excuses. Just silence. But the kind of silence that screams into your bones, that burrows into your skin and stays there. And in that moment, I wasn't sure who I was more afraid of, him or myself. The second he disappeared, I slammed the door. Hard. Not to scare him. Not to make a statement. But to shut out what had just happened. To trap it in a room, behind steam and tile and my own skin that still burned, not from exposure, but from being seen. I wrapped the towel tighter around me, as if fabric could erase the way his eyes had looked at me. Not lustful. Not ashamed. Just calm. Curious. Still. Like he wasn't shocked. Like he'd been waiting. I sat on the edge of the tub, breathing hard. The music was still playing in the background, some sultry voice whispering words that suddenly felt too intimate. Too raw. I should have felt nothing but shame. And I did. Partially. But what scared me most was the part of me that didn't. The part of me that felt seen. Not judged. Not pitted. Just seen. And in that terrifying moment, I realized my heart was racing. Not from fear. Not from embarrassment. From something else entirely. From something I hadn't felt in a very, very long time. I stared at the door, waiting for footsteps. An apology. A knock. Anything to make it feel less surreal. But nothing came. Just silence. Again. I dried off slowly, carefully. Like maybe if I moved gently enough, I could erase the electricity crawling over my skin. I looked at myself in the mirror, really looked. And I saw a woman I hadn't seen in years. Not a mother. Not a wife. But a woman. Bare. Flawed. Soft in places that used to be tight. Older eyes. Slight lines. A body shaped by time and loss. But still, a woman. And I hated how much it mattered that someone had seen her. I told myself it was a mistake. He was just a boy. He didn't know what he was doing. He probably thought he saw something he wasn't supposed to and got confused. That he'd forget about it by morning. That it didn't mean anything. But the truth is, I didn't forget. I couldn't. Because for the first time in what felt like forever, someone looked at me and noticed. Not because they were supposed to. Not out of duty. Not because I asked. But because something about me pulled their eyes there. And that's what I couldn't forgive myself for. That in all my guilt, there was something darker sitting quietly underneath validation. I started second-guessing every moment between us. Every soft smile at breakfast. Every quiet moment we passed in the hallway. Every time he asked if I needed help carrying groceries or if I wanted him to stay home instead of going out. I'd brushed it off. Called it kindness. Teenage politeness. Maybe a longing for maternal connection. But now I wasn't so sure. Now, everything felt like a breadcrumb I hadn't seen until I turned around and realized the path it had drawn behind me. I laid in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, blanket clutched to my chest like it could protect me from the storm brewing inside. My husband hadn't called. No check-in. No good night. Just silence on the other end of a marriage that had grown quiet long before this night. And in that silence, I felt the weight of what hadn't even happened. Because it didn't need to. The damage wasn't in the act. It was in the shift. The way the air between Liam and me had changed. The way my mind now wandered to places it had no right to go. The way my body had remembered what it was like to want to be wanted. I closed my eyes and begged for sleep. For escape. For peace. But all I saw was his eyes. Calm. Still. And not even a little afraid. And I couldn't stop asking myself, is it wrong to feel alive when you've been emotionally dead for so long? The next morning, I woke up feeling like I hadn't slept at all. My body had rested, sure. But my mind, it had never stopped moving. I walked into the kitchen like I always did. Same robe. Same slippers. Same quiet house. And there he was. Liam, already dressed, already sitting, his bowl of cereal half finished. He looked up, nodded a simple good morning. Just like always. Too normal. Too casual. And I nodded back. But inside, every nerve in me was on high alert. Waiting, watching, wondering if we were both going to pretend nothing had happened. And we did. For days. That moment, me standing bare in the candlelight, him watching in silence, it hovered over us like fog. But neither of us acknowledged it. Instead, something subtler began to happen. He started being around more. Usually, he stayed holed up in his room or out with friends. But now he lingered, hung around in the kitchen while I cooked, offered to help with dishes, sat a little closer at the dining table, asked about my day. At first, I convinced myself it was coincidence, that he was just being kind, that maybe he felt guilty for walking in on me, and this was his way of making up for it. But then I noticed the way our conversations grew longer. Not just small talk, real talk. He started asking me questions, personal ones, about my past, about what I used to do before I got married, about what kind of music I liked, what books I read. And I heard myself answering, not like a stepmother giving polite responses, but like a woman, slowly unfolding again. I started laughing more. Real laughter, the kind that comes from deep in your belly, not the fake one you wear to keep up appearances. And little by little, I started dressing differently. Not provocatively, but with more intention. Maybe it was unconscious. Maybe it wasn't. I wore colors again. Put on lipstick even when I wasn't leaving the house. Wore a blouse that dipped just a little lower. A skirt that hugged my waist a little tighter. I told myself it was for me. To feel human again. To remember who I used to be before I became background noise in my own life. But a small voice inside whispered the truth. I wanted to be noticed. And I knew who was watching. Then came the storm. A Friday night. Thunder crawling across the sky. Rain tapping hard against the windows. My husband? Out of town. Again. Some tech conference. Some late-night meeting. Honestly, I'd stopped keeping track. The power went out. Everything plunged into darkness, except the sound of the storm and my own breath. I lit candles. Again. The flickering kind that makes shadows dance across the walls. I was in the kitchen, trying to find the flashlight. And then he was there. Liam. No words. Just that same quiet presence. He walked in, his phone flashlight barely cutting through the gloom. I turned to him, startled. He smiled. Not a big one. Just a knowing curve of the lips. You okay? He asked. I nodded. Just looking for a lighter. He found it. Handed it to me. And in that simple motion, his fingers touched mine. Just for a second. But they lingered. Not by accident. Not anymore. And neither of us pulled away. The air between us shifted again, heavier this time. Breath catching. Time slowing. I looked up at him. And he looked back. Not like a boy, but like someone who knew exactly what he was doing. Exactly what this was becoming. The candle between us flickered, casting light on our faces. Everything else blurred. It wasn't a kiss. Not yet. But it felt like something worse. Because it was mutual. Because we both stood there, eyes locked, wanting. It happened again. The same space. The same air. But this time, it was different. There was no storm. No flickering lights. No excuse. Just stillness. It had been days since that night in the kitchen. And though neither of us spoke about it, something between us had changed. There was an energy, quiet, unspoken, but constant. Like a string stretched tight between us, humming every time we got too close. He hadn't touched me again. Hadn't lingered like before. But the way he looked at me, it held weight. Heavy. Intentional. Like he was waiting for something, or waiting for me to decide. That evening, the house was unusually quiet. My husband was still away. He hadn't even bothered to check in. Just another cold text about work, about meetings, about delays. Liam was upstairs. Or so I thought. And me? I went to the bathroom. Not to escape, but because it had somehow become the only place in the house that still felt like mine, where I could shut the door and remember that I was still a person. I lit a candle. Not for comfort. Not even for light. Just to set the mood for myself. To feel something gentle, warm, alive. I undressed slowly, let my robe fall to the floor, and stepped into the bath. Steam rose around me like a veil. I leaned back, let my head rest against the cool ceramic edge, and began to hum. Soft, aimless. A tune I couldn't name. But it filled the room just enough to make the silence feel less alone. The door was cracked, like last time. But this time I didn't fix it. I told myself it didn't matter. That I was alone. That I was safe. But deep down, I knew I wasn't. I knew what I was doing. I knew what I was inviting. The towel I kept by the tub slipped. I didn't reach for it. I let it fall. The air touched my skin like a whisper. A reminder that I was uncovered. Unarmored. And then I felt it. The shift. Not a sound. Not a word. Just a feeling. And I looked up. Liam was there. Again. Framed in the doorway. Still. Quiet. But this time, I didn't rush to hide. I didn't reach for the towel. I didn't flinch. I just looked at him. And he looked at me. Not a boy. Not confused. But steady. Aware. Present. Seconds passed like lifetimes. He turned, just slightly, like he knew he should leave. Like he was giving me one last out. And in a voice I barely recognized as mine. I said his name. He stopped. Didn't turn around. Didn't say anything. But I saw his shoulders rise, a deep, silent breath. Like he was holding in something too big to release. Like he didn't trust himself to speak. And I said nothing more. No explanation. No apology. No command. Just silence. He stood there for another second. Then walked away. Slow. Careful. Controlled. Like the moment had weight, and he didn't want to drop it. The door clicked gently behind him. And I was alone again. But I didn't feel alone. I sat there in the water, my heart pounding in my chest. Not from fear. Not from shame. But from the undeniable truth that something had passed between us. Something silent. Something dangerous. Something that neither of us had touched, but that touched us. Something we could never undo. The next morning, the house felt colder. Not the kind of cold you fix with blankets or heat, but the kind that settles into the walls, into the air between people, into glances that don't meet. Liam was already at the table when I came down. Coffee in hand. Eyes on his phone. Expression blank. He didn't look up. Didn't say good morning. Didn't even shift in his chair as I passed. And I felt every inch of distance. Like someone had dragged a thick line between us overnight. A boundary neither of us had drawn, but both of us were now obeying. I made breakfast with my back to him. Scrambled eggs. Dry toast. No music. No candles. Just silence and the sound of silverware on ceramic. And still, no words. By the time I turned to face him, he was gone. Plate rinsed. Chair pushed in. As if he'd never been there at all. My husband came home later that evening, suitcase in one hand, his laptop bag in the other. He walked through the door with that same tired smile he always wore after business trips, like he was returning to something he had to maintain, not something he missed. He kissed my forehead, like a father might, affectionate, distant, empty. And I stood there, letting him, feeling absolutely nothing. I listened as he unpacked, told me about meetings, delays, the awful hotel coffee. I nodded at the right parts, smiled when he made a joke, laughed once, just to keep the illusion. But inside, I wasn't listening to a word he said, because my mind was somewhere else. It was still in the doorway, still in that flicker of a moment. still echoing with the sound of Liam's footsteps retreating down the hall. And it wasn't just guilt I was feeling. It was obsession. With what didn't happen. With what almost did. Because sometimes, the things we don't do, the lines we almost cross, they haunt louder than the ones we do. And I couldn't stop thinking about it. The look in Liam's eyes. The way his breath had hitched when I said his name. The way my skin still burned where his eyes had rested. He started avoiding me after that night. Not in an obvious way. Not in a way you could call out. But in the quiet way that makes everything feel like static. He left the room when I entered. Kept his earbuds in during meals. Answered in one-word replies. He wasn't angry. He wasn't cold. He was distant, guarded. Like he was building a wall faster than I could find the door. And I let him. Because I didn't know what else to do. Because I was afraid if I tried to fix it, I'd only break it further. But that didn't stop the ache. And then one afternoon, I was coming down the hallway, laundry in my arms, music humming faintly from my phone. And I felt it. That weight. That presence. I looked up. And there he was. Standing at the end of the hall. Back straight. Shoulders still. Just staring. Right at me. Not blinking. Not smiling. Not moving. And I froze. We didn't speak. We didn't nod. We didn't pretend. We just stood there. Two people bound by a moment they couldn't name. One that never crossed the line. But left both of us standing on either side of it, too afraid to move. And in that silent stare, I knew. We would never talk about it. Never acknowledge it out loud. But it would live in both of us. A ghost between glances. A presence in the silence. It didn't need words. It already had power. And, from that day on, nothing between us would ever be the same. I was a woman crumbling. Slowly, quietly, piece by piece. And Liam. He was just close enough to catch the pieces as they fell. I didn't mean for it to happen. I didn't go looking for it. Didn't plot or plan or chase anything forbidden. I just wanted to matter. To be noticed. To feel something again that wasn't numb or tired or expected. And somehow, in the emptiness my husband left behind, Liam became the mirror. The one who looked at me like I was more than just the sum of my chores and my silence. Not with lust. Not with pity. But with presence. That's what I think I was drawn to the most. He was present. In a house where no one really looked at anyone anymore. Where we passed like strangers under the same roof. I keep telling myself I never meant to cross a line. That I never touched him. Never invited anything outright. But I know better. Because sometimes, the worst betrayals don't need a touch. Sometimes, it's the glance that lingers. The silence that stretches too long. The feeling you don't say out loud, but let live in the spaces between words. I wanted to be wanted. It's that simple. And that complicated. And now, I wonder. Did I use him? Emotionally, I mean. Did I pull him in with my sadness? With my need? With the ache I'd spent years trying to silence? Or, did he understand? Did he see me, not just as a broken woman, but as a human being trying to hold herself together with bits of memory and music and half-closed doors? Sometimes I think he hated me for it. Other times, I think he didn't know what to do with what he felt either. And the truth is, I don't even know what I feel anymore. Because it's not just guilt. It's not just shame. It's grief. For everything I lost. For everything I forgot how to feel. For the woman I used to be, the one who danced without fear, who laughed without effort, who was loved without question. I sit with it all in silence. I think about leaving. Just packing a bag and disappearing into some version of my life that makes sense again. Somewhere quiet where I can sort through all the things I never said and all the things I didn't let myself feel. Then I think about staying. Pretending this house is still a home. Pretending the stare in the hallway never happened. Pretending I can go back to being invisible again. Then there are moments. Late at night, when everything is still, when I wonder about confessing. Not in my husband, he'd never understand, and maybe he wouldn't even care. But to Liam. To tell him I'm sorry. That I was lost. That I didn't mean to put that weight on him. That he deserved better. That we both did. But I don't do it. I don't leave. I don't confess. I don't ask for forgiveness. I just do nothing. Because the truth is, sometimes, doing nothing is the only way to survive something that almost broke you. Even if it means living with the ghost of it every single day. Have you ever been seen by someone and it changed how you saw yourself? Not in a romantic way. Not even in a way you can explain. But in a way that made you stop and wonder what they saw that you'd long forgotten was even there? Because I've been asking myself that question every day since. Since that look. Since that night. Since the silence that followed. Was I wrong for not stopping him? For not closing the door tighter? For not pulling away sooner? For not putting a wall between us before the air got thick with things we couldn't name? Or was I just a woman, desperate to be remembered? Not as a mother, not as a wife, but as me, a whole person, a breathing, aching, needing woman who just wanted to feel like she still existed outside of duty and titles. That's the part no one talks about. Not the kiss, not the act, but the gaze, the shift, the stillness. We never touched. But something touched me. Deep. Quiet. Lasting. And I can't decide if that makes me guilty or just human. So tell me, was this betrayal? Or was it just human vulnerability exposed? Have you ever crossed a line without moving a muscle? Have you ever felt more seen by someone who shouldn't than by someone who promised they would? Tell me in the comments. Tell me honestly. Because maybe if we name it, what we're feeling, maybe we'll stop carrying it in secret. And if these stories move you, break you, make you see yourself in the spaces between the words, then like this video. Subscribe to Shocking Infidelity Saga. Because here, we don't just tell stories. We unravel the human heart. Loneliness doesn't always knock loudly. Sometimes it slips in. While you're looking in the mirror, trying to remember who you used to be. It doesn't beg. Doesn't shout. It whispers. Through open doors, through silent dinners, through soft glances that last too long. And sometimes, the deepest scars aren't left by touch. They're left by being seen. When you weren't ready. When you didn't ask. When you needed it anyway. So be careful who you reach for. When you're falling inside. Because not every connection heals you. Some just remind you of how deeply you've been missing.